We're going to look tonight at our sixth disciple in this series on 12 ordinary men and how God used ordinary men to change the entire world. Tonight we're looking at Nathaniel. We're halfway home. We're on the sixth disciple out of the 12, so we're halfway home. In the synoptic gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if you take a look, you will notice in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the man right after Philip is Bartholomew. And then in the list of the book of Acts, he comes a little bit below Thomas. It's kind of like in college football, you have the AP poll, the coaches poll, the USA Today poll, and for some reason in the Acts 1 poll, Bartholomew ranks a little lower than Thomas. But in those synoptic gospels, Bartholomew is listed right there as the sixth disciple. In Acts, even in Acts 1, he is called Bartholomew. However, in John's gospel, which we learned when we studied John, John has unique material. 92% of his material is unique to John alone. His gospel, he calls him Nathanael. It's not a contradiction. It's not one guy versus another guy. They are believed to be the same guy. Now, there have been a lot of scholars who have lost a lot of sleep arguing over whether Nathanael equals Bartholomew, whether they're the same guy, different guy. Really doesn't matter. However, when you take a look at Bartholomew, and then in John's gospel, he lists Nathanael as the disciple right after Philip, and with the disciples, it seems to be pretty common sense that Nathanael and Bartholomew are the same, one and the same. I believe they are one and the same. John doesn't give us a whole list of the gospel or disciples like these guys do, but he does tell us at the end of Jesus' ministry, after he's resurrected, Nathanael goes fishing with the other guys who are also disciples. So you can take a look. Nathanael's missing, but in John he's there. So most likely Nathanael is Bartholomew. Now, given that they are one and the same guy, here's why he has two names. Nathanael is a Hebrew name which means gift from God. Bartholomew is a patronymic name. Anybody want to guess what a patronymic name is? Very good, sir. It identifies him with his father. We have patronymic names in our day. Johnson, Robertson, Dennisson. Those are patronymic names. They identify with the father. When you see Bartholomew, that is literally son of Tomai, or son of Tomai. So Bartholomew simply means he's Tomai's boy. So when you put the names together and you get Nathaniel Bartholomew, you get he is a gift from God, son of Tomai. Or his full name would be Nathaniel Bartholomew. Does that make sense? He is Nathaniel, son of Tomai. Pretty simple. Now, Tomai, this is where it gets fun. Tomai learned at the feet. Let's do this right. Tomai learned Hebrew scriptures at the feet of Eber, who was a Hebrew master. Tomai learned from him. Most likely Nathanael learned from Tomai. So Eber taught Tomai. Tomai taught Nathanael. Now let me make this make sense. Do we have any Star Wars fans in the house? All right, who's a Star Wars fan? Brother Scott, come up here. You're going to illustrate how this looks in Star Wars. Okay? Eber is the Hebrew master. He taught Tomai. Tomai taught Nathanael. What does this look like? If Eber is Yoda, what does this look like? Okay? So you have Yoda teaches Obi-Wan, teaches Luke. Does that make sense? Does this make sense now?
Yoda teaches Obi-Wan, teaches Luke.
Thank you, sir. What does that tell you? That tells you if the master taught your father who taught you, you're only one generation from learning the scriptures from a Hebrew master. Luke may have never learned from Yoda, but he taught Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan taught Luke. So Nathanael was a Hebrew student who learned one generation removed from a Hebrew master. Which would tell us that Nathanael knew the Scriptures very well. He was familiar with them. He loved the Scriptures, pored over the Scriptures, and he was well trained because he was trained by one of the best teachers who taught the Scriptures, and he taught his dad. So as I mentioned last week, we're going to drill down these list of disciples as we get down toward the bottom of the list. And this is we're out of the starting lineup. The 5 guys who were on the court, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip. Now we're on the bench. We're at the 6th man. We're at Philip. We're going down all the way down, and you see there's less and less and less about the disciples as we go down to the list. And then we get to Judas Iscariot, and there's a whole lot about him. Very little good. There are a total of 7 verses that are dedicated to telling Nathanael's story. So this can be a pretty short Bible study. But in his book, All the Apostles of the Bible, an excellent resource by Herbert Lockyer, he wrote this: a great view may be seen through a window of 7 panes. 7 verses about Nathanael, but he says we see some great views by looking through this window of 7 panes. Up until this point, all of Jesus' draft picks have come from one city. Can anybody tell me where that is? All of his disciples, Peter, Andrew, James, John, and Philip came from? They came from Bethsaida, a fishing town. But Nathanael's going to break that trend. Nathanael comes from Cana. As you can see, Cana is right here. Nazareth is right here. Now, Bethsaida is right over here. So they're not too far from each other. Cana, Nazareth, and Bethsaida, they're all kind of the same place. But Cana is about 4 miles north of Nazareth. Just think of it as Mount Vernon to Gambier. 4 miles east, 4 miles north. We're 4 miles away from Gambier. Cana was 4 miles away from Nazareth. Very close, and perhaps too close for Nathanael's taste. Because before Jesus was born raised there in Nazareth, Nazareth was not known for much until Jesus came to Cana. Cana was not known for much. But after he came to Cana, Cana hit the map as being the place where Jesus turned water into wine, his first miracle. He performed that in Cana, Nathanael's hometown. It probably felt good to Nathanael that Jesus did that in his hometown. Think about it. Nathanael he's not a Hebrew master, but he learned from one generation away from a master. So Nathanael is a smart, educated young man in the Scriptures. And yet he forsakes everything and follows a rabbi who doesn't even have a home to call home. So it had to feel good for Nathanael in his hometown with all of his teachers and high school buddies and all that around him to see Jesus work a miracle and to validate Nathanael's discipleship. If Nathanael's going to follow Jesus, it feels good for him to say, see, I told you I'm following for a reason. Did you see what he did with the water and the wine? Did you see that? So he did that in his hometown. Up until this point, Jesus has only recruited brothers. Peter and Andrew, James and John, and he recruited Philip. So it would stand to reason that he will recruit who? Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, and his... It would stand to reason he would recruit his brother, because Jesus has only recruited brothers up to this point. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, and Philip's brother. But he doesn't. He breaks that trend also. He recruits Philip's friend, Nathanael. So here's what Philip told Nathanael about Jesus. Right after Jesus called Philip to follow, he ran to find Nathanael, and here's what he says in John 1:45. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses and the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, son of Joseph." Philip was so excited. I mentioned this to you last week. He had been looking for, waiting for 4,000 years, humanity had been looking for and waiting for a Messiah. And finally, he comes. And Philip was so excited, beside himself, that Nathanael was going to be just as excited, because Nathanael is a student of the Scriptures. So Philip comes running to Nathanael and says, "Nathanael, we found him. He's here. We found him. Moses wrote about him. The prophets wrote about him. David looked for him. Isaiah looked for him. All of them died without finding. But we found him. I've seen him. We found him. He's Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael wasn't excited at all. Philip is beside himself, and Nathanael's not excited at all. He says, "You say Nazareth? Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? You're telling me, Philip, that our long-awaited 4,000 years in coming Messiah is from Gambier? From 4 miles away from my hometown? Is from Centerburg? Is from 14 miles away from your hometown, Bethsaida?" Nathanael's not impressed. And here's why. Because Nathaniel knew the Hebrew Scriptures. Remember, he learned from Yoda. Or he learned rather from Obi-Wan, who learned from Yoda. Nathanael knew the Scriptures. He knew Micah 5:2. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be smallest out of Judah, yet out of you shall come a ruler whose going forth have been from old and from everlasting. He knew Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. It will come to pass in the latter days, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established on the top of the mountain, shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways and walk in his paths, for out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Nathanael knew the Scriptures. Messiah is coming from Bethlehem, and he's going to set up a kingdom in Jerusalem. And he's not touching Nazareth. He's not even going near Nazareth. So strike two for Jesus bar Joseph of Nazareth. And then Nathanael reveals what's really in his heart when he asks Philip, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's not just that Nazareth is so close. It's not just that the Nazareth Narwhals play the Cana Cannons every year in Little League. It's that Nathanael has a contempt in his heart for Nazareth, but Nathanael is not alone. Nazareth was known as the Galilee of the Gentiles. It said the Judeans don't like Galilee. The Jews didn't like the Galileans. But the Galileans didn't even like the Nazarenes. So the Judeans say, no, those Galileans, they're bad people. But the Galileans would say, no, those Nazarene, no, they're bad people. So Nazareth was kind of the offscour of Israel. What would you consider to be a most despised city in Ohio? This section. You know, it's funny. I think it's in Lockyer's book. Maybe, Sister Sunkel, you'd read it as well. In Lockyer's book, I believe it is, he says, it would be like people from Cleveland saying, oh, those people in Buffalo. And I thought, Cleveland makes fun of another city? They looked at Nazareth like some people in Ohio look at Cleveland. Can anything good come out of Cleveland? That's how they thought about Nazareth. So Nathanael reveals his national prejudice when he asks, can anything good come out of Nazareth? John MacArthur, in his book, 12 Ordinary Men, excellent, excellent book, especially to study these disciples. He wrote this: men's ears are closed to the gospel by many kinds of prejudice: racial prejudice, social prejudice, religious prejudice, and intellectual prejudice. One of the greatest compliments we've ever been paid as a food pantry came from a client who came through and told one of our volunteers, I think it might have been Sister Weber. That client told Sister Weber, when I come here, you look me in the eye. You treat me like a person, not a beggar. Apparently they'd been to other places and other people had seen them with social prejudice. These people are just here to take advantage of us. They're just here to abuse the system. Let's just get them in and get them out and do the very least we can do. And this lady said, when I look at you, you look back at me and see me as a person, not a beggar. That's a beautiful compliment to be paid. When you say that we're clear. I pray by the grace of God we can all be clear of any manner, any measure of prejudice, whether it be social, racial, national, intellectual, any kind of prejudice. Philip did not argue with Nathanael. Even though he was blinded by his prejudice, even for a moment, Philip just said, come and see. I mentioned this to you last week. He didn't try to say, well, Nazareth's got a little shopping mall going in there on the east side of town. It's going to be really nice. They're doing some good things in Nazareth, building it up, a little development. He just said, I'm not going to argue with you about how you feel about Nazareth. I'm just telling you, if you come and see this Jesus, he's going to change your life. So Philip went. Nathanael put aside his prejudice for a little bit. He thought, if Philip's wrong, I have nothing to lose. And I can tell him I told you so for the rest of my life. But if Philip's right, if we've been waiting 4,000 years for the Messiah to come, and Philip's right about him, and I miss out on him because I feel like nothing good can come out of Nazareth, I will kick myself for the rest of my life. What happened next is absolutely miraculous. Jesus saw Nathanael coming, and Jesus spoke first. How would you like to get the God of glory to speak to you first when you come to him? Jesus saw Nathanael coming and said of him, Behold, an Israelite, indeed, Sister Ruff, in whom is no deceit. That's high praise from God Almighty to say, you know, I've looked at you, I've searched you through and through, and I can't find any deceit or guile in you. One of the privileges of pastoring comes as the opportunity to speak at funerals. I know that sounds morbid, but it's a privilege, especially when saints of God who have lived their lives well, they go home to their reward and to be with the Lord. It's an honor and a privilege to share somebody's story with everybody else. When I meet a family, especially those, if there's a family for whom there is no minister, and so the funeral home calls me to ask if I'll officiate, I'll meet with the family, have an interview with them, and talk about, were there any favorites? Did they like to go certain places, say certain things? Did they like to cook certain dishes? Did they like to eat certain dishes? Those kind of things. Just try to get some stories, vacations, things like that, and try to share their story. There are some people who make that job a little harder. One of the strangest funerals I ever officiated came from a family that didn't have a minister. So Snyder called me and asked me if I'd officiate. And I called the family just like I normally do, and I asked them, can you just maybe share some stories with me? Or have any hobbies? Nope. Any stories you'd like me to share? Nope. Any memories? Nope. Any favorite things I'd like to do? Nope. Any places I'd like to go? Nope. Anything at all? Nope. Okay? So what would you like me to do? I want you to be short. I want you to make it short. Don't you worry about that. Can do. I can do short. I can do it. So I got to the cemetery. It was just a graveside service. The family was there, but not all the family. The aunt was not there yet. Service will start at 1 o'clock. The aunt still was not there. So I turned to the lady with whom I've been talking, and I said, you want me to go ahead and wait for your aunt or his aunt? And she said, nope. Started to think, can you say anything different than nope? Nope. You want me to wait for the aunt? Nope. Let's go. Let's do this. I started at 1 o'clock. I was in my car headed back to Mount Vernon at 1:05. 60 years of life and 300 seconds of here lies John. It makes it tough when people aren't giving you any stories, because most of the time it's not that way. Most of the time funerals are laden with superlatives. When you meet with a family after somebody's passed away, you talk to them, what did you remember? He never said an unkind word. She always had a smile on her face. He never left his family at home. Always and never superlatives. And that's after people knew them for 60, 70, 80 years. Jesus met Nathanael for a second, and he serves up this 5-course meal of superlatives when he looks at Nathanael and says, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit. The King James says, in whom is no guile. How would you like to say that, for Jesus to say that about you? He comes to look at you and say, I've searched them through and through. I've examined them from top to bottom, head to toe. I can't find one deceitful, dishonest, disingenuous tendon in their body. That's what he said about Nathanael. Behold, an Israelite indeed, and I've looked at him, and there's not 1 ounce of deceit. Now, if Jesus tweeted that about me, I would have to retweet it. I'm sorry, but I'd have to let everybody else know this is what Jesus said about me. That's what he said to the 6th disciple. He said Nathanael was genuine, he was pure, he was honest. He was not poisoned by deceit or by dishonesty. He was an Israelite indeed. Now that word indeed is important because it comes from the Greek word alethos, which literally means truly genuine. He was saying this man is an Israelite alethos. He's a true, genuine Israelite. That is the same word that the centurion used when he cried at the cross. Truly, alethos, this man was the Son of God. It's when Jesus says in John chapter 8, verse 31, if you obey my word, then are you my disciples. Alethos, indeed. If you obey my word, continue in it, you are my disciples truly, genuinely. Now, just because Nathanael was born in Israel doesn't mean he was an Israelite indeed. Just meant he was an Israelite by birth. So Jesus throws in that very heavy word to let everybody know this man is a genuine, true Israelite. What made him an Israelite indeed? It was the purity of his faith. You remember in the Beatitudes we've been studying, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Many of the Israelites in Jesus' day were false. You remember what Jesus said about them? They stand on the street corners and they pray long and loud so everybody can hear them pray. They are not Israelites, alethos. They may have been born in Israel, they may have been raised in Israel, they may have been schooled in Israel, they may have Israel on their tassel, on the rearview mirror of the chariot, but they're not alethos Israelites. Because those who are born in Israel doesn't just make them an Israelite indeed, it just makes them Israelite by birth. But if you want to be a true child of God, then there has to be a purity and an honesty about your faith. Nathanael was true, and Jesus knew that because Jesus knew Nathanael. Just being born in Israel did not mean they were born again. That's good news for us. Just because we're not born in Israel doesn't mean we cannot be born again. Romans chapter 2, Paul says, for he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor in circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, and the spirit, not the letter, whose praise is not from men, but from God. I was born in Columbus, Ohio, Grand Hospital, right, Mama? You were there. But I was born again in St. Louisville, Ohio, in January 5th of 1992. My born-again experience is what makes me a Christian, alethos, indeed. Just because you weren't born on the banks of the Jordan River doesn't mean you can't be a part of the family of God. You could have been born in Paducah, Kentucky, but if you are born again anywhere from now to the rapture, that means you have the privilege to be a child of God, alethos, indeed. And Jesus would say the same about you. He said about Nathanael, behold, a child of God indeed. Now, when he told Nathanael that, Nathanael was surprised. This carpenter's kid from filthy Nazareth just called him a true Israelite with no deceit in his heart. Think like Nathanael thought. Is this Jesus just some fast-talking salesman trying to flatter me to get me to follow him? Because if so, that's not going to work. When we used to live over on Hamtramck Street here in Mount Vernon, I would get telemarketer calls all the time for all kinds of things. Vinyl siding, new windows, a timeshare in Brandon, just everything all the time from everybody. And it was funny because they would try to talk to me like they knew me. They'd call, hello, is LJ Harry there? Yeah, this is him. Hey, LJ Harry, can I call you LJ? Would that be all right? I said, sure, that's fine. How's the weather there in Ohio, LJ? Oh, it's pretty good. How's it there wherever you are? Oh, it's good, it's good. Thanks for asking, LJ. Hey, listen, I know you're a smart guy and you know a good deal when you see one, and you're not going to pass one up when you see an offer of a lifetime. So let me just tell you, let me get some instructions mailed out to you. Make sure you don't miss out on this deal. You still live at 300 East Hatramatic Street? At that moment, I know. I have no idea who this guy is. This guy has no idea who I am. He's just trying to warm me up, flatter me, try to make me think I know him, and he knows me, so I'll buy whatever he's selling. That's the way it looked like to Nathanael. This guy's just trying to get me to buy whatever he's selling. When he says, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit. Nathanael thinks, and he even says it, he says, what do you mean? You don't even know me. How are you going to say that about me when you don't even know me? Then Jesus shocked him shoeless with his next statement. John 1:48, to Sister Sunkel's point. Before Philip called you when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael, when he heard that, he realized this is not flattery. This is omniscience. This is not some fast-talking salesman trying to get me to follow him. This is God in flesh who saw me when I never saw him. In their culture, houses were very small. Many times they were just one room. Now, sometimes if you were wealthy, you could add a second story. Here's what a typical two-story first-century house would look like. This here's the courtyard area. This up here is what they call the upper room. That's the door leading to the outside. This was the patriarch room if dad or granddad still lived at home. Very simple, very humble house. Obviously, you can see it's not very large. And so many times when they the house would get very stuffy, and if they cooked inside, they kind of get very smoky. So many times they would plant a fig tree on the outside of the house, and that'd be a place for shade and a place they could resort to relax. But most of the time, that would be the place they would go to study the Scriptures and to pray. It was Nathaniel's prayer room. Nathaniel would often resort there, according to many scholars. He would resort to the fig tree, and that's where he would go to pray. Let me ask you this question. If the person who knows you best, if I were to interview them and ask them, where do you have your prayer room? Would they be able to give me an answer? I heard it said this year in January, somebody posed the question, and it was really a thought-provoking question. They said, if you can't tell me when and where you pray, are you really praying? It's very thought-provoking. Because many times we just say, well, I'm just going to pray throughout the day or whatever, but Nathaniel would take time, dedicated time, and come to a prayer room and spend time with God. One of the reasons we do that on Sunday nights. If somebody came in looking for you at 5:40 on a Sunday night, where would they look? Would they look in the lobby, parking lot, or would they go to a prayer room and say, it's 5:40 on a Sunday night, I know where to find them, they're going to be in the prayer rooms. That was Nathaniel's prayer room. In John 1, chapter 49, Nathanael answered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. He went from, who do you think you are, you fast-talking salesman from Nazareth, to, oh my God, you're the Son of God. You're the King of Israel. That's all it took for Nathaniel Bartholomew to believe that Jesus, the carpenter's kid from Nazareth, really was the Christ. Now, he called him the Son of God, and he called him the King of Israel. That's a revelation Peter had in Matthew 16. After 3 years of walking with Jesus, Nathaniel had that revelation after 3 sentences with Jesus. It took Peter 3 years to figure out, I know who this is. It took Nathaniel 3 sentences to figure out, I know who this is. This man is the Son of God. Now, Nathaniel was amazed, and Nathaniel was hooked. Then Jesus wowed him even farther when he said in John chapter 1, verse 50, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree. Do you believe? You're going to see greater things than these. And he said to him, verily, verily, or most assuredly, I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Nathaniel, you haven't seen anything yet. Just because I saw you and you couldn't see me, that's nothing. From now on, you're going to see heaven open. And you're going to see things that Moses died to see, but did not see. You're going to see things David wrote about, but did not see. Isaiah prophesied about, but did not see. You're about to see heaven open, and you're going to see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. This reference to angels ascending and descending is a reference to the dream Jacob saw centuries earlier, when he was running from his brother Esau. And in that dream, God set a ladder up that stretched from earth and reached all the way to heaven. Are those rungs equidistant enough? Not too bad. He said there's going to be a connection that joins heaven to earth, that brings heaven to earth. And one day, by the grace of God, will bring us from earth to heaven. And he said the heaven's going to be open, and you're going to see this, and angels are going to ascend, and they're going to descend on the Son of Man. He was letting him know, I am the link that will join heaven to earth. I'm the one who's going to bridge that gap that will bring heaven down to earth, and one day take you from earth all the way to heaven. He wowed Nathaniel with what he just shared with him. Now, here's what's very interesting. Now, this is just a conjecture. This is just a guess. This may not have happened. But humor me. Why do you suppose Jesus referred to that story out of all the stories? Why would Jesus refer to that one out of all of them? Anybody have any guesses? Mark? Well, it may have been close proximity to Jacob's well. I didn't study that, but that's possible. Brother Mates? It does. It absolutely does. When he mentions the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man like a ladder, it refers to the dream Jacob saw. Here's what I'm going to suggest. It's not doctrine. It's this, say, I, the Lord, not the Lord. But here's what I'm going to suggest. Jesus wowed him when he said, I saw you under the fig tree. We know the fig tree was a place he would go to resort to study the Scriptures and to pray. Could it be that while Nathanael was under the fig tree, that he was studying the book of Genesis, and he was studying about the story in Genesis 32, where Jacob saw a dream, and in that dream there was a ladder from earth to heaven, and the angels ascending and descending on that ladder? Could it be when Jesus said that, he was telling Nathanael exactly what he was reading when he was underneath that fig tree? If so, it was just a further test or further proof of his omniscience. I didn't only see you, but I saw what you were reading. Could it be? It's not conclusive, but could it be that's why Jesus brought that story up? Well, one of the neat things about when Nathanael says, you're the Son of God, Jesus says, you'll see the angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. The Son of God denotes his power. He's divine. He can do anything he wants. The Son of Man denotes his humanity. He was tempted in all points like as we. He's touched with the feeling of our infirmities. He was made a high priest so he could redeem us. Son of God says, I can do anything you need me to do. Son of Man says, I know exactly what you need because I need the same things. Son of God says, I can meet those needs. Son of Man says, I know what those needs are. So it identifies us. Nathanael says, wow, you're God. And Jesus says, yes, I am, but I'm also man. And I can identify with your weaknesses, but I can strengthen you when you're weak. I can identify with hunger, and I can feed you when you're hungry. I can identify with cold, and I can give you warmth when you're cold. So Jesus identifies himself as the Son of Man when Nathanael identifies him as the Son of God, bringing together that he is divine and he is human all at the same time. We know at the beginning of John's Gospel, Nathanael's full of faith. We know at the end of John's Gospel, Nathanael's full of faith. After that, he disappears from Scripture's stage. We read nothing about him further in the Bible. The last time we see him in the Bible, he's in the upper room. They're about to choose a disciple to replace Judas, and that's all we see about him. Early church history suggests that he carried the gospel as far northeast as Armenia. Do we have the Armenia map up? If not, I may not have included it in there. It'll look more like a Google map. That's okay, no problem. I may not have included it in there. Armenia, Israel is here. Armenia is all the way up here by Iran. And church history suggests he carried the gospel all the way up to Armenia, where he was martyred for preaching the gospel. Nathaniel Bartholomew, the gift of God, son of Ptolemy, was full of faith when he began as a disciple, and he was full of faith when he gave his life as a disciple. So Herbert Lockyer was right. A great view may be seen through a window of 7 panes. That's our friend Nathaniel, the 6th disciple. Anybody have any questions about Nathaniel Bartholomew? All right, let's hit the highlights. Number 1, he was from Cana. John chapter 1 teaches us. He was prejudiced against Nazareth. Philip introduced him to Jesus. Jesus amazed Nathanael with his omniscience, that he saw him under the fig tree. Nathanael proclaimed Jesus as the Son of God and the King of Israel. Jesus revealed himself to Nathanael as the ladder in Jacob's dream. And according to tradition, he died a martyr in Armenia. Not a whole lot recorded about him, but one about whom Jesus said, there's no deceit in him. Let me ask you this question. So far we've studied 6. We're halfway through. When you look at the disciples, and my goal with this is not only so we can know who they are, but really I want us to realize these were ordinary men. These were simple fishermen, tax collector, ordinary men who God used to do extraordinary things by the power of His Spirit. So taking a look at the ones we know of so far, with whom would you identify yourself the most out of the 6? If you had to choose one of the 6 to be, not what you want to be, but what you see as who you are and your personality, who would it be? How many would say you're like Simon Peter? Bold, outgoing, just go for it, rush in. It's okay. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's no right or wrong. Okay, very good. How many would say you're Andrew? Quiet, unassuming, in the background, but you're bringing people to Jesus. You love people and you bring them to Jesus. How many would say you're Andrew? Okay. James, son of thunder, passionate, sometimes to a fault. But by the end of it all, God used him in a great way. Ready to call fire down from heaven, but loved people in the end. How many would say you're like James? I really want you to pick just one. How many would say you're like James? Okay. John, James' brother, son of thunder, ready to call fire down from heaven, but by the end of it, compassionate and getting people to heaven. You remember what he said when they carried him from where he was to church? He just kept saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. How many would say you're like John? Compassionate. Passionate at first, passionate in the end. Okay, very good. Compassionate. How many would say you're like Philip? Melancholy, measured, analytical, calculated, sometimes pessimistic, but you want things to be a certain way, and you're very measured, very analytical. That's your husbands are pointing to the wall. Okay, very good. Now, how many would say you're like Nathaniel? Genuine, true, full of faith. All right, very good.